The debt machine designed to keep generations financially trapped. What if the debt you carry, the loans your parents struggle to pay, the national debt your country drowns in, were never mistakes of a broken system? What if debt wasn't a side effect of modern life, but the fuel of an engine built centuries ago? A machine that needs you to owe money, needs governments to borrow endlessly, needs generations to be trapped in obligations they can never escape. Tonight, we uncover a secret most people will never learn. The global economy is not powered by money. It is powered by debt. But the real question is not why we borrow. It's who designed the world to function this way. And what happens when the machine becomes too big to control? Stay with me. Because once you see how the system was built, you'll never look at money the same way again. On-screen visuals during hook. Slow zoom on a dollar bill. Fade into ancient coins melting into modern credit cards. Quick flashes of debt charts, foreclosure signs, student loan statements. A ticking clock overlaid on global stock markets. Final shot, giant gears turning, made of credit card chips and bond charts. The world before the debt machine. To understand the machine that traps modern generations, we must go back, far back, to a world where debt was not a tool of governments, but a weapon used only during desperation. A world where money meant something real. Gold, silver, physical wealth. If a kingdom had gold, it prospered. If it ran out, it collapsed. Simple, honest, brutal. But this old world had a fatal flaw. Gold could not be created on demand. And kings hated limitations. Medieval Europe illustrations, gold coins stacked on tables. Scenes of kings sitting with advisors pointing to treasure chests. Maps of empires shrinking and growing based on wealth. Empires wanted armies. Armies needed weapons. Weapons needed metal. Metal needed money. So every war, every expansion, every ambition was chained to the same constraint. How much gold do you have? But then came a moment. A moment that unlocked everything. A moment where desperate rulers discovered something dangerous. If they couldn't find gold, they could borrow it. And out of that desperation, the first seeds of the modern debt machine were planted. The birth of government debt. The origins of the debt machine trace back to 17th century Europe. A continent fighting endless wars. England, France, Spain, the Dutch. Everyone needed money. But the most important moment happened in England. The crown had run out of gold. War debts were piling up. The treasury was empty. And the kingdom faced collapse. That's when a group of wealthy merchants and early bankers proposed a radical idea: let us lend the government money. In exchange, give us control over how that money circulates. This idea led to the creation of a revolutionary institution. Painting, Foundation of the Bank of England, 1694. Old parchment loans signed by the crown. Early paper money. In 1694, the Bank of England was born. Not as a bank for the people, but as a lender to the government. It issued paper notes backed by government debt, not gold. This was the first major twist in our story. Money no longer represented wealth. It represented debt. And the king realized something incredible. Almost intoxicating. He could spend money he didn't have. Paper notes being printed. Animation showing debt turning into money supply. Gears turning, powered by bonds labeled interest. This new system spread rapidly across Europe. Every government wanted the same power. The ability to borrow endlessly. Debt became a permanent feature of nations. But another country would take this concept and elevate it into a global empire. The United States. America supercharges the machine. America begins its story in debt. Even before it became a nation, the colonies borrowed heavily to fight Britain. When the United States was formed, its treasury was a disaster. Enter Alexander Hamilton, perhaps the most influential architect of modern finance. He argued something shocking. A national debt, if it is not excessive, will be a national blessing. A blessing. Not a burden. A tool. A foundation for growth. Hamilton convinced Congress to adopt a system where the US would always carry debt forever. Investors loved it. Bankers loved it. And thus began the American version of the debt machine. Portrait of Hamilton. Early US Treasury ledgers. The first bond certificates. But the machine wasn't complete. The US still lacked the modern engine that would define its future. A central bank. That would arrive in 1913. Dark cinematic shot of Jekyll Island. Silhouettes of bankers meeting. Signing of the Federal Reserve Act. In a quiet holiday period, with many lawmakers absent, Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act, creating the Federal Reserve. A central bank with enormous power. It could create money. It could control credit. It could influence interest rates. But most importantly, it could expand the debt machine at unprecedented speed. This was the single most important financial transformation of the 20th century. But the greatest twist was still to come. When money stopped being real. For centuries, even in debt-based systems, one rule kept everything grounded. Money was tied to gold. Governments could borrow, but only as long as they maintained gold reserves. This connection kept inflation under control. But in 1971, everything changed. President Richard Nixon announced the temporary suspension of the gold standard. A temporary measure that became permanent. The world had entered the era of pure fiat currency. Money was now backed by nothing but government decree. What did this mean? It meant governments could print unlimited money. Central banks could expand credit forever. And the debt machine could grow without limit. Nixon's televised announcement. Gold bars dissolving into paper dollars. Exploding money supply charts. This moment was the true ignition point. Because without gold to restrain governments, debt skyrocketed. And something else happened silently but devastatingly. Inflation became the default state of the economy. Prices would rise forever. Wages would fail to keep up. People would be forced to borrow simply to maintain their standard of living. This was no longer a financial system. It was a trap. How the debt machine traps generations. Once money became unlimited, the machine spread into every corner of society. Let's break down the 4 major traps. Trap 1: Student loans. Universities realized that if students could borrow money, they could raise tuition unlimitedly. Today, global student debt surpasses trillions. A 22-year-old starts life owing what previous generations earned in a decade. Overpriced tuition boards. Students stressed, sitting with loan paperwork. Charts showing tuition inflation versus wage stagnation. Trap 2: Mortgages. Homes used to cost a few years of income. Now, they require full lifetimes of debt. Banks discovered a vicious cycle. More available mortgage loans, higher housing prices. Higher housing prices, bigger loans. Bigger loans, more interest income. A loop that never ends. Homes doubling in price. 30-year mortgage stamped in red. Eviction and foreclosure signs. Trap 3. Credit cards. Credit cards turned everyday living into high-interest debt. A $500 item becomes a $1,700 burden. Minimum payments ensure people stay indebted for decades. Trap 4. National debt. This is the biggest trap of all. Governments borrow so much that repaying the principal is impossible. They pay only interest. Endlessly. Silently. No escape. Future generations inherit this burden at birth. Fallout: the cost of a system that can't stop. Every crisis of the last century exposes the same pattern. The machine grows until it breaks. Then it's rescued with even more debt. 2008 financial crisis. Triggered by excessive mortgage debt. Banks collapsed. Millions lost homes. The government solved it by borrowing billions more. Lehman Brothers collapse. Housing bubble burst animations. 2020 pandemic crisis. Governments printed trillions to prevent collapse. Debt exploded. Inflation surged. Once again, the machine was fed. Failed fixes: why the machine cannot stop. You might wonder, why don't leaders fix this? The answer is simple. Stopping the debt machine would collapse modern economies. Debt fuels GDP. Debt funds government spending. Debt inflates housing. Debt keeps corporations alive. Debt keeps stock markets rising. If the machine stops, everything collapses. Politicians won't risk it. Banks won't allow it. Consumers can't survive it. So what do they do instead? They accelerate it. Modern parallels: shocking data. Here is where things become troubling. Global debt, $330 trillion. US credit card debt, over $1 trillion. US national debt, $35 trillion. Average home price skyrocketing faster than income. 70% of young adults say owning a home feels impossible. 40% rely on debt to pay monthly expenses. Governments spend more on interest than on education or health. These patterns appear in almost every modern country. Debt is now the bloodstream of the world. And everyone from students to nations is caught in the same trap. The psychology of the machine. The machine thrives on one thing: people blaming themselves. Most people think, I'm bad with money. I should budget better. I'm not working hard enough. But no. The truth is simple. You were never meant to escape. The system works only if the average person stays indebted. 3 takeaways. Takeaway: the debt system was designed. It didn't evolve naturally. It was engineered and perfected by governments and banks. Takeaway: inflation is not an accident. It is a feature. It ensures money loses value over time, forcing people to borrow more. Takeaway: the machine cannot stop. Stopping it means economic collapse. So leaders choose the only path they can. Grow the machine. Expand the debt. Push the consequences into the future. Final warning: open-ended thought. The debt machine is approaching a crossroads. For centuries, it has grown. For decades, it has accelerated. But today, For the first time in history, the machine is growing faster than the world can handle. Every empire that built its prosperity on debt eventually faced three outcomes: hyperinflation, currency collapse, total financial reset. We don't know which path the modern world will take. But one thing is certain: a system that grows on unlimited borrowing cannot sustain itself forever. The question is not if something will shift, but when. Call to action: natural, not salesy. If you want deeper stories about money, power, and the forces shaping your life, hit the like button so others can learn the truth. Subscribe to the channel, not for entertainment, but for clarity. And share this video with someone who believes debt is normal. Because once you see the machine, you can never unsee it.